All right, guys, in this video, I'm going to be talking about operant conditioning. A lot of you guys voted for operant conditioning. I am also going to make a video on classical conditioning plus other videos as well. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on Facebook, Instagram. If you listen to podcasts, I'm on there as well on your favorite podcast platform. But let's get into this video on operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is it's a system in which the subject, okay, whether it's the animal or the person, understands the role of behavior in relation to consequences. That's what operant conditioning is. Very simple. Behavior in relation to consequence. That's what it is. It's not, it's not associative learning like classical conditioning, okay? It's not regarding how the animal, the subject feels about certain things. It's purely mathematical and it's purely technical. So I do this and I get this in return. That's in a nutshell what operant conditioning is. It has everything to do with the mathematics of this behavior. This behavior gives me this result, and and not doing this behavior gives me this other result. That's how it is. Feelings aside, that's completely different. How I feel about the behavior, how I feel about the environment, how I feel about the situation has nothing to do with operant conditioning. That's where a lot of dog trainers, a lot of people get it mixed up. My job in this video is to simplify it as much as I can. And again, it has nothing to do with feelings, nothing to do with temperament. It has everything to do with the mathematics of behavior. This behavior equals this consequence. So now let's break it down a little bit more. So in operant conditioning, we talk a lot about reinforcement and punishment. And again, this is a video that is meant to be simple and short, so I'm going to give you as much as I can in this video. Punishment and reinforcement are part of the mathematical equation of operant conditioning. Think of it as a minus and a plus. That's really all it is, okay? A minus and a plus. It's just that when this terminology was being developed in the labs, they were not using plus or minus or mathematical lingo like that. There was different terminology that had to be used. So the terminology that was used was, some of the terminology was used was reinforcement and punishment. These are really quite literally plus and minus. Reinforcement would be the plus. Punishment would be the minus, the subtraction. Here's what I mean by that. If I do something, okay, if the subject performs a behavior and this behavior brings about a consequence that makes this behavior continue, okay, meaning this behavior repeats itself as a result of that consequence, this, by definition, is considered a reinforcement. This is a consequence that is reinforcing that behavior. So meaning that consequence is making that behavior multiply. It's making it happen again and again and again. See how mathematical it is? All right, now if we go on the flip side of that, punishment, it's quite the opposite. We're now talking about subtraction. So if I perform this behavior and as a result of this behavior, the consequence comes about, okay, the consequence happens, and as a result of that consequence, this behavior diminishes, this behavior goes away, or this behavior is reduced, okay, so it's subtracted, then by definition, this consequence is considered a punishment. Because what a punishment does is a consequence that decreases the rate of the behavior. That's punishment. Remember what I talked about earlier, it's not emotional. It's not, it has nothing to do with how the subject or how you feel about the process. So this is where a lot of times people get so emotional, so wrapped up in their in their upbringing, that they think punishment has to be something really bad. And punishment is not something really bad. It's just a mathematical equation. So this happens, the result of that, this behavior goes away. That is the definition of punishment. It's a subtraction. Okay, whereas an addition is reinforcement. Behavior happens, consequence happens, the behavior multiplies, the behavior keeps happening. That's how mathematical it is. Now we can break this down even more by talking about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Okay, now we're talking about positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. We also can break down punishment the same way by saying positive punishment, negative punishment. That's even more math, okay? So positive reinforcement, we're still talking about the consequence that keeps occurring, okay? The behavior keeps occurring. The behavior keeps multiplying, but the consequence could be positive reinforcement or it could be negative reinforcement. Again, the positive and the negative, they don't mean one is good and one is bad. The positive literally means plus. The negative literally means subtraction, literally means minus. So again, mathematical, not emotional. If the consequence comes in the form of something is added as a result of the consequence, like the consequence itself it's an addition, that is considered positive reinforcement. If the consequence itself is a subtraction, but the result is the same, the result means the behavior still keeps repeating itself, but in the form of the consequence, there was a subtraction in the form of the consequence, that is considered a negative reinforcement. So I'm going to give you an example. Behavior, let's say something very simple that a lot of people are familiar with, sit, okay? So the behavior is to sit. If I want the sit to multiply, I want to see more sits in the future, then I'm going to use reinforcement because I want the sit to happen more often. That's reinforcement. I need to use some sort of reinforcement to make the sit happen more often. So the consequence has to be reinforcement, and that will equal there will be more sits in the future. Now, what kind of consequence is that? Well, the consequence could be an addition, meaning I'm adding something pleasant that the dog is motivated by. The dog goes, oh yeah, I want more of that so that I can keep doing those sits. That is positive reinforcement, right? So the dog sits, you give him a piece of food. That would be positive reinforcement. That means the sit is likely to happen in the future, provided the technique is applied properly, obviously. Now, how does negative reinforcement come about? Negative reinforcement comes about in a way where there is a subtraction. Okay, so let's say I want still the sit to happen more often. Well, how do I do that with negative reinforcement? First, there has to be some sort of pressure added. The pressure can come in different forms. I'm not going to talk about tools, techniques necessarily, but pressure. Okay, there's some sort of pressure that maybe makes the dog slightly uncomfortable, right? Some sort of slightly uncomfortable situation. That slightly uncomfortable situation goes away as a result of the dog sitting. So the dog sits, that discomfort leaves the equation, and then the dog learns, oh, when I sit, the discomfort goes away, therefore sitting in the future makes the discomfort go away. Very basic example of how that could be applied, without it being terrible, like a lot of people think negative reinforcement is bad. Remember, it's not emotional, it is mathematical. So I'm going to give you an example of negative reinforcement in the sit setting. So what I would do is I would physically grab the dog, physically push his butt on the ground, physically lift his neck up, right? As I'm physically pushing the butt on the ground, as I'm physically pulling the neck up a little bit, what I'm adding here is I'm adding some sort of discomfort. I'm adding some sort of pressure. I'm pushing on the dog's butt, and I'm kind of lifting the dog's head. That pressure goes away, subtraction, when the butt hits the ground. The butt hits the ground, pressure goes away, pressure gets released. And immediately after that, that repetition is over, we repeat the process again. So the dog learns, oh, the sooner I put my butt on the ground, the sooner that physical pressure goes away. That's still reinforcement. It makes the sit happen more often. Now we're talking about punishment. So punishment comes in the same forms. It comes in positive and negative, subtraction and adding. So punishment would be a little bit different. So in punishment, I want the behavior to not happen. Remember, I want the behavior to diminish. not to multiply. I want the behavior to diminish. So I'm going to have a behavior that I don't particularly like at the moment, okay? Maybe not ever, but maybe just at the moment, I don't want that behavior. And I want that behavior to not happen as much. Now, when people think of punishment, they're thinking, oh, this has to be a horrible, horrible behavior for it to go away. It doesn't have to be a horrible behavior. It can be. Horrible behavior could be, your dog chasing cats, right? Your dog chasing bikers, your dog chasing vehicles, your dog digging the ground. Those are the examples that people usually think about when they think about punishment. That's not necessarily the case. That's definitely an example, but it doesn't have to be that way. It could be something like, let's say my dog downs when I don't want him to down. Okay, that's a behavior that I don't want to happen when I'm not asking for it. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I want my dog to sit, and instead of sitting, he keeps downing. Right, so in this situation, I want the dog to put his butt on the ground in a sit position. But instead of the dog sitting, the dog just keeps downing. Well, I don't want the down to completely go away. I just don't want the down to happen at that moment. So I could do this by reinforcing the sit, or I could do this by applying a little bit of punishment for the down, for that setting. So what I could do is, in that example, okay, this is a simple, mild example. What I could do is, I'm asking the dog to sit, right? And I want to reinforce the sit, but the dog downs. Well, simple. Negative punishment would be, hey, something goes away, okay? Something that you want goes away. So the dog is not getting paid. I'm withholding the reward. I'm telling him, you're not getting paid for that down. I'm not asking for it. Let's do it again, right? That's certainly one way to do it. The consequence of the dog downing when I'm not asking him to, okay, is there is no food. There is no petting, there's no affection. That completely goes away. And if you keep doing that, you go away, training session's over, nothing is happening. You're not eating your treats, you're not getting the affection, none of that. Okay, that would be negative punishment. For that moment, I don't want that down. I want the down later in a different setting, but in this setting, I don't want it. So I'm now using negative punishment to decrease the likelihood of that down behavior from repeating itself in that setting, in that training session. This is what a lot of people don't think about when they think of punishment. People usually think of punishment as extremes. They go, I don't want that to happen ever again. That's not always the case, right? Sometimes good behaviors happen when you don't want them. Sometimes you call the dog, and when you call him, the dog downs. These are good behaviors. I just don't want them in that setting. So sometimes we have to use a little bit of punishment for the behaviors that in a different context are good, but I just don't want them at that moment. So I just explained how negative punishment would work in that instance where I don't want the down to happen at that moment. So positive punishment would be I add something, okay? Positive means addition. So the dog downs when I'm not asking him to. I'm asking him for something entirely different. The dog downs, I add, okay? I bring something in that makes the dog go, oh, I shouldn't down anymore in this session, okay? And that addition usually could be something that is on the form of pressure, something slightly unpleasant that makes the dog go, oh yeah, I don't want to actually down in this session. And I'm like, correct, I'm not asking for it. So I'm adding, as a consequence, something is being brought into the equation that makes the dog go, I don't want to down right now. Maybe I should sit, that's more beneficial for me. That's a mild example. Now let's go to your extreme examples where a lot of people are very comfortable with those when it comes to punishment. Right? So the more extreme examples are behaviors we definitely don't want, right? I want that behavior to completely stop. In that instance, let's say the dog is in fact, doing something like, jumping on you, right? The dog is jumping on you, and we're looking at this problem from the angle of using punishment, which is a subtraction. We want the jumping to go away, right? So the dog is jumping. Now there's a couple of things that I could do this. I could do positive punishment. And remember, I'm adding something that makes the dog go, jumping is really not that beneficial. I probably shouldn't jump. And that addition will have to be something that is unpleasant enough that makes the dog go, yeah, I don't want to do that. The subtraction, if we were to use negative punishment, would be something that would make the dog go, I don't want to do that because when I do that, I lose this. And that subtraction could be in the form of engagement entirely. The dog is jumping. This is, again, just an example. It's hypothetical. You fill in the blanks with whatever example comes to your mind, but I'm just giving you a blanket example. Negative punishment, the dog is jumping because he's getting joy out of the jumping, right? Whether I'm petting him or not, he's getting some sort of joy out of the jumping. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the joy out of it, okay? I'm taking the joy out of it, not by adding pressure, but I'm just taking the joy out of it. And I could do that by completely ignoring him or by putting him away. And I'm telling him, dude, that doesn't even work for me. I'm not even gonna interact with you. I'm not gonna pet you. I'm not even gonna push you away from me because that's more interaction. I'm not gonna tell you no because that could also be more interaction. I'm just simply gonna grab you and put you in your crate. There's no affection for you. So what I did in that example is completely removed any possible joy out of that activity to make the dog go, jumping. When I do that, the joy gets sucked out of it. He kills the joy out of it. Making the dog go, okay, if I want to stick around longer and I want to engage with my human, jumping is not it, right? It's when my paws are on the ground that he brings the joy to me. He pets me, he gives me affection, right? So that would be an example of using negative punishment to make the jumping less likely to happen in the future. So again, guys, this is a very quick blanket video. If you do have any more questions, if you want more details, let me know. Let me know what you want to work on. And if you are interested in something more formal, if you want to do some lessons, some more formal lessons, some more teaching, let me know and I can arrange that. And I'll see you guys on the next video.